cat came back, and that cat is named Paul throughout the very next day.
I just got out of the shower.
Hopefully the audio, we'll see how it works on this episode. Yesterday's audio, mine was like anemically low. So
okay.
Made some adjustments, and we'll see if it's not terrible.
Yeah, when we connected yesterday, I said to you that you sounded really low. I think you had made a change in response to...
I was trying to get rid of some echo stuff and everything else, and now we made a different change, and we'll see if it's a dumpster fire or if not. And if you don't like it, you can get your money back.
Wow. I mean, new equipment. So
Yes. So we'll have it figured out this week. And also check this out, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Check this out. Just if we want to do like a spooky nighttime edition.
So okay, nice.
I can now control my lighting from my little dashboard over here.
I can do that too, but I have to reach over here and pull a string.
Yeah, like a peasant.
Look
at him having to extend that arm.
Like a banker from the 1930s. I get like that visor with for some reason has like a green. I don't know what the point. Do you know what the point of that is? I have no idea. Like a see-through green thing. I don't know.
Some great imagery right there.
It's like a Italian bookie in the back of a barber shop, and outside of Boston.
That's when you also kept a little fifth of whiskey right in the side carts with
right next to the revolver.
And smoking in the office was still allowed.
This meeting is either going to go really good or really bad. Mm-hmm. It depends on what you say next. Yeah.
Yeah. So yesterday was a sort of busy day, I guess, across the.
I think it is incredibly important that we cover the biggest news from yesterday first, which is that Microsoft is winning the video game wars.
Mm-hmm. Nobody saw that coming. Which, it's funny you bring that up. Actually, a friend of mine yesterday texted me that she was having trouble actually legitimately finding an Xbox to buy. And so I'm like, what? That's crazy. Like, there's whatever. I went on Amazon. And I'm not even joking. If you want an all-digital version, like, without the disk drive and all that stuff, it's being price gouged right now. Like, they're like $330.
Oh, that's not cool.
So you're basically kind of locked into if you want an Xbox. Now, I know this isn't everybody everywhere, but at least locally for me, if I want an Xbox, like I'm expecting to spend at least $300 because all of like the entry-level SKUs are just gone. They're not available.
I feel like, gaming during the quarantine is a lot like, computing during the quarantine. You kind of use what you have, like you go to war with the army that you have is,
what's
the guy's name? Rumsfeld said, whatever. But yeah, I mean, okay. So, I mean, I'm lucky that I happen to have multiple Xbox consoles. My son's home. My son actually took my old PlayStation 4 upstairs. He's like, "Are you using that?" And I'm like, "Nope." And I don't know. So we'll see what goes. I don't know what he's doing, but anyway, So what I'm alluding to, however, some interesting data. So Sony, as part of, I think, of their earnings report this week, said that they have 41 million PlayStation Plus subscribers. That is the equivalent of Xbox Live Gold. Mm-hmm. We don't know how many Xbox Live Gold subscribers there are because Microsoft gives you the broader Xbox Live number, which hit 90 million in April because, a lot more people are online, et cetera. But the paid subscription is going to be half that or less. So maybe a lot less. We don't know. So maybe those are comparable. Maybe they're not. But this is actually kind of fascinating to me. PlayStation Now, which is their streaming service for games, right? And they, if you're not familiar with it, they, I think it's PlayStation 4, of course, but I think it also works on the PC still. It provides access to PlayStation 4, 3, and 2, and maybe even original PS games. So it's, whatever. It's a true streaming service. So it's kind of like the Netflix of video game services, if you will. But what that competes with, of course, is Xbox Game Pass. Mm-hmm. So PlayStation Now, 2.2 million subscribers. Xbox Game Pass, 10 million.
Bam.
4 times as big, over 4. Yeah. Suck it, Sony. What I want to do is like pull a string and have the confetti and balloons fall down and we could play some triumphant Rocky music or something.
I thought you were actually going to bring up some pearls and clutch them.
Yeah, right. Put a monocle in my eye and stroke my Cheshire cat or whatever that thing's called. Yeah. So whatever. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
All right, let's get on to the real news.
Yeah. So Microsoft Build Conference yesterday, not a dumpster fire. I mean, they actually, for how quickly they kind of turned around from like an in-person event to, hey, we're going to do this all digital thing. Not an Xbox all digital, but an actual all digital conference. But, I think they did all right. I will give them some credit for being able to just kind of whip this up, string it together, and no major catastrophe.
Oh, no, for sure. The scope of this thing is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, unfortunately, there's kind of like a pro and a con of doing these kind of events where a lot of the employees are coming from home, which is interesting, right? I think there's an interesting, I don't know if you've kind of picked this out yourself, but you can see a real difference in the homes of, say, like a Brad Smith versus the home of low-level engineer on whatever team working out of his apartment in Redmond, but whatever. But, that's interesting on its own level. There was a little bit too much of like what I would call fake work from home stuff where kids would, pretend to break into the room because that's funny when that happens in real life. And I kind of wish they would tone that stuff down a little bit, but you can't underscore or understate or overstate the incredible nature of putting on something of this scope. And they had a lot to announce, It was and for people like us, like I don't care about Azure pretty much at all. I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but I just don't. I just glaze over. And the past few builds, at least, I don't remember the exact number, has been Azure. It's been like a hailstorm of Azure. Yes, that was a nice reference for you old guys. But there was a lot of Windows news, a lot of client news. I thought that was nice. And it was good. Good news.
There was some of the bigger things, which aren't big, but they are big, is Microsoft just casually announces that they're releasing a Windows Packet Manager, which people have been asking for since 1992, probably. That's finally going to be built in, and it's already kind of populated. And I realistically think that the long-term future of the Packet Manager is just going to be a visual front end that will be known as the store. Microsoft has already said
use Package Manager.
Package. Yeah, not Packet. Sorry, Package Manager.
Yeah,
like UPS or FedEx. Who
not like a network packet sniffer or whatever.
I think the store just becomes the visual front end. I think they've already announced that everything in the store will eventually be in the Package Manager, which can all be downloaded and installed from a command line interface. And so this Package Manager is one of many things they announced that is very forward leaning, because the initial thing that they're doing is not what most people are going to want, right? What most people are going to want is what you just described, and whether it's then we're going to see third-party clients. And this was the notion that Kevin Gallo had brought up last year when he was talking about broadly about Windows apps. We'll get to that strategy, but also this notion that the store is not going to be it. That we are going to figure out a way for developers to deploy what we now think of as store apps, we'll call them Windows apps, safely outside of the store. Yep. And
it's interesting because the Package Manager is completely command line based. So it's really, in its current form, only of interest to developers. But it does provide that kind of chocolatey kind of, what are some of the other, there are a lot of tools. Ninux is one of, I think is the name of
there's a bunch out there, but these going forward, this will all just be built into Windows. So you don't actually have to go download anything else. So.
Yeah, and I don't want to get off on a weird tangent, but like if you've ever done something like, say you have an HP computer and you use their update tool to update the drivers and stuff, that tool will actually run individual installers, and you have to kind of step through them like an idiot. And it's like, it's nice it's there, but it's kind of dumb. If you buy a Dell computer, they have a similar application, but it does all that stuff in the background for you. So it's scripted. It's just kind of happens. That's the way it should happen. And that's what this thing is. It's but for apps, and it allows you to kind of build a list of, like, every time I install Windows, I want to just click once and have every one of these things and the newest version of these things to install, and then be updated automatically in the background. It's big. This is big stuff.
It really is. So that is one of the big announcements.
That's one of the 117. We'll move on to number 2.
We will go on to the second one, which I know everybody was actually really waiting for, which was the Pinterest integration into Edge. That was
wow, look at you also going in a direction no one saw coming. I would say just as important as this is the coming integration with OneNote in the background. And of course, the first time that I ever heard about collections, my reaction was, Why are you building yet another thing that does the same thing as other things you already have? What this should be is a notebook in OneNote,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't, it doesn't look that way in the app, but that's what it is in the back end. And that's how it syncs to all of you already have a thing that does this. Anyway, now they're gonna do that too.
The other big announcement, one of the other ones, is the Fluid framework, which is to me very interesting. Although we're still in the very early days of that, has taken a step forward. It's also going to be completely open source for those who aren't familiar with what the Fluid framework is. There's Fluid components, I think, or whatever they call them, and it's effectively you can embed like features of applications inside of other apps. So you could put like an Excel table inside of an email, and then if you updated that Excel table in another document, in that email it would automatically be updated. And so it's just kind of web componentizing of Office little features. So it's pretty big.
It is, I would say, for the internet, what DDE originally and then eventually Olay became for Windows back in the early 90s. It is, and it, specifically the compound document part of Olay, which was it was kind of a central part of Windows 95, which is kind of funny. It's so old, but yes, the ability, like you said, the ability to embed those parts of apps, or essentially embed apps as components inside of other apps. So, but across the internet, you know.
Yep. And then they also announced another to-do list app thing called Microsoft Lists, but this one's a little bit more robust. It's more of like an Airtable, if anybody's familiar with that app. But Microsoft, in their own words, to-do is a personal task application. Lists is going to be something that lives inside of SharePoint, Teams, and Microsoft 365, and it's supposed to be a collaborative to-do style application.
They need to consolidate brands and just, I mean, Jesus, I just don't understand that. But
I don't understand. I think this one will get Wonder. I think to-do will get Wonder listed at some point, or just sort of like
yeah.
Or they'll call it Microsoft List for home use only, or something dumb like that.
To-do itself, Microsoft To-do, has kind of a weird history, not just the Wunderlist aspect of it, but as they kind of brought it into the broader Microsoft ecosystem, there were already to-do or tasks solutions in Outlook.com and Outlook on the web, Office 365. There was Outlook, the application. So they kind of created a single back end for all of those things. I assume and hope. You said it's not true, so I was going to say I assume and hope that's true with this new thing. They use the same back end, but SharePoint based. So
it is SharePoint based.
Whatever. I mean, okay.
At least I think it's SharePoint based.
I know that's
everything inside of Microsoft is SharePoint based. OneDrive is, Teams I believe is. So why not?
Yeah, SharePoint is like the alien race in the Matrix that was controlling the humans in the pods. It's kind of hard to explain, and it's really big.
And then what else is there?
Oh my God, Brad, you've missed this, literally the biggest news of the day.
No, I know we're getting there. The biggest news is probably that templates are finally coming to Teams. So when setting up Teams, if you've always said, God, I wish I could just copy this team from this other org and just replicate it for this new team, you'll be able to do that here in the near future. Or the thing that Paul is probably alluding to is that the Windows subsystem for Linux is finally going to be able to support GUI apps as well.
Yeah, actually, it's technically interesting.
It is.
I don't understand the need for. I don't mind that it's there. I mean, I think it's interesting. Is there a big call for?
I'm
Linux
sure there's some
GUI
apps that people want that are from the Linux world, and they want the GUI front end for it, which is great. Okay. I think it's just also just sort of the natural evolution, right? It's like, we did the command line stuff. That's all great. We brought the terminal stuff all over. And, well, we'll give them the UI, too. Why not? I mean, just...
Okay.
And then let's see, what else? The other news is obviously that Microsoft revealed a new supercomputer. Like the fifth largest, which I thought I had a great joke. I thought Mary Jo said Microsoft introduces the world's fifth largest supercomputer, and my response was, now maybe they can finally have more than 9 people on a video panel instead of Teams. But here we are.
I was going to say that's like announcing you have the 5th most popular video game console. It's like it's technically one of those things. Anyway. Yeah.
And then some other big news, too, is that HoloLens 2 will be getting native 5G capabilities here in the near-ish future.
It was pretty much the only HoloLens mention of note.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
it's
I don't.
basically like a module, right, for the existing HoloLens. It's not even a new.
I
It's
think
not like
so.
it's a
Yeah.
new.
I don't.
Interesting.
It might be technically a new SKU, but it's not like a. There's nothing changing up front. It's all business in the back, as they would say.
Wow,
So yeah,
like a mullet.
you get it. I
Okay.
think. I mean, they're pretty much out there on their own little island though in this space. I mean, magically, completely floundered a
Loaded.
couple $1 billion. Apple and Google haven't really launched. Well, Apple hasn't launched anything. Google is sort of out there with their little Tinker toy compared to
Yeah. Well, I mean,
HoloLens.
Apple. We know Apple's coming to this market,
Yep.
but the thing that they create is going to be for consumers. So
Right.
even though they're the same type of thing, they're not really competing for the same dollars.
Hmm.
At least not yet. I mean, maybe that will change over time, but
Maybe. I mean, look at the iPhone. It's now sort of
yeah,
an
no,
enterprise device.
that's
So
what was going through my head. As I said that, I was like, obviously, we'll see what happens. But the initial, you're going to be looking at like cute little AR pandas on the couch with the Apple thing. I mean, Microsoft's talking about, machinery and manufacturing and remote help for people who are doing wiring and stuff. I mean, it's completely different
yeah,
use cases.
and then I don't know what else. Is that it?
I hate you.
Oh yeah. There is the one other thing that yesterday announced was that Adobe updated to Photoshop on the iPad.
Seriously. This Windows Terminal 1.0.
Yes.
So I mean, I guess.
Yeah. There's also that. I think the Paul thing that Paul is alluding to is that if I don't mention it, he's going to form his own union and
Right.
petition
Right.
the powers that be to talk about reunion, which is going to be
Yeah.
if you really thought that UWP was the long-term future of Windows, if you really were in that camp and just had a stake in the ground,
Yeah, if you spent the
Microsoft-
last year shitting on me because I was dumb enough to communicate what Microsoft said,
and
then
if
you might
really
want to pay
think that they're
attention to
not
this
gonna
bit.
back away from that stake.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
probably not gonna.
I will say this. I mean, the one thing I've always said about Microsoft and developers, and it really does apply here, is they really don't orphan people.
Yes.
In the sense that, like, look, some of their platforms fail. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The mobile stuff, imploded, not their fault. But if you became up in the .NET world, and you learned C# and you adopted these frameworks like WinForms and WPF or whatever, there's still a way forward for you. In the mobile space, that way forward is Xamarin Forms today. It might be this .NET MAUI thing, which is basically, next gen forms, I guess. And on the desktop space, it's been UWP, and UWP has suffered from a number of problems. The most obvious being that it's a mobile platform, and I can tell you just from my own limited experience over the past 6 to 8 months or whatever it's been developing apps for Windows, that these problems are real. And there are just simple things like, as an app developer, you might want to say, like, you're working in a word processing document and you quit the app, you click the X button up there. UWP doesn't have a way to handle that unless you're sitting there saving state the entire time. I mean, there's no way you can prompt the user at that point and say, hey, you sure you want to do this? Do you want to cancel? You might have done that by mistake. I mean, it's either impossible or next to impossible. It's not it's not a native, event handler. It handles application state with regards to power management. It will, if the app sits in the background, it kind of goes to sleep or whatever. That's not how traditional desktop apps work. It is obviously desirable in some cases, but it may not be the expectation. If you as a user alt tab back to the app, and then it has to restart. It's goofy behavior for the desktop. So Project Reunion is the solution to this problem, and it's the solution to some other problems. So there's a decoupling of UWP from specific Windows versions. So as they updated Windows UWP rather, you had to get the new version of Windows to get those updated features. You couldn't just run them on any Windows 10 version. So now you will be able to. It's specifically UX related, which is the first version. The WinUI stuff is the UX. That's important because now developers who are using Win32 frameworks like WinForms and WPF and also React Native can access these more modern application look and feel elements in their own apps. And that's the thing. I spent a bunch of time with this last night. That doesn't work yet in the first preview, but it's coming. And you can go through this process. So if you're familiar with the application I wrote that looks like Notepad, You add a new WinUI desktop window to the project. You create the UI for it, and then you map the event handlers to the stuff you already wrote for the old UI, and then you just flip the windows. And now you're, instead of running that old window that you created, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you run the new window. And it's all modern looking and everything, but it still does all the same stuff. This means that application developers will be able to upgrade their existing apps and make them look great. That's cool. So that was never possible with UWP. Mm-hmm. So with UWP, you had to start up from scratch. And of course, those controls look, in the beginning especially, look terrible. It doesn't have all the same capabilities. It's very interesting. So,
yep.
You know what he didn't do though? So I appreciate a little bit of clarity. The one thing that he didn't do, and he used this term last year, Kevin Gallo, that is, he should call these things. They need a name for this thing, right? Mm. So even Project Reunion itself suggests it's a temporary holding pattern name. Like it's not the name. Like Project xCloud is probably not going to be what they call this thing. Last year he referred to these things as Windows apps, and I know that's very generic and whatever. But the reality is, like, these are like modern Windows apps. And so if you create a new one, which almost no one will, but it's basically a desktop application with a UWP XAML front end, if that makes the UI part front end. That means the back end has none of those limitations, the mobile app baloney I was talking about. But the front end gives you all that modern good stuff. It's good. I think the more likely scenario, though, is going to be people who already have apps, whether they're UWP apps or WPF, WinForms, whatever, and they want to just modernize and bring them forward. You bring them forward to .NET 5. That's the first thing, and then you use that more modern UI on the front end. It's interesting.
Yeah,
it's a big deal.
It is, and we're in the very, very, very early days of this.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to come. I mean, and the big question is what will come. We know, well, right. There's a WebView thing we know about. So they replaced the old Legacy Edge WebView with WebView 2 based on the Chromium Web, which is great for people who use web technologies. But the UX stuff is some people. I mean, a lot of people do. And then the UX stuff for Windows apps, and by the way, I should say this year the goal is to ship this UX bit this year. Right. This didn't get highlighted too well, but they're also bringing Project Reunion / WinUI and whatever comes next to the other platforms that were supported by, I guess, UWP or One Windows or whatever you want to call that. So meaning Xbox and HoloLens. And this is the interesting thing. Like people have said to me, well, Paul, UWP can't be dead, UWP, because it's the only way you can make HoloLens apps. And my response to that has always been like, well, things don't really just disappear completely. I mean, whatever. When I say dead, I'm talking about the kind of the way forward for app developers. But when you do a WinUI app today, you have two choices. You can make a desktop app or you can make a UWP app. So there's WinUI / desktop, WinUI / UWP. That will be the future for HoloLens, as such as it is. I mean, I'm sure you're not going to be able to create a desktop app that runs on HoloLens. But these other platforms, I mean, we'll see. It's like Xbox, Surface Hub, HoloLens. I guess you could include IoT, Windows IoT in this list. There are UI-less versions of these apps. You can create libraries and components and all that kind of stuff, too. It's not just about Windows and apps. But anyway. There you go. There's UWP. There'll be some DNA in there for sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, and as I've said before, and as I noticed as I did this myself, the one good thing, and it may literally be the only good thing, but the one really good thing about UWP from a developer's perspective is the XAML UI creation stuff and the modern UI. It is wonderful. And I love it, and I hate the rest of it. So, to me, Project Reunion is like, yes, it's exactly. Take the one good thing out of there and get rid of the rest. It sounds perfect to me.
Yeah, and that's what their plan is, at least for now. And so
Yeah.
we'll continue to watch that roadmap, and I'm sure there'll be in the months and weeks and years ahead a lot more of that stuff sort of just getting extracted out of UWP and tossed into Reunion, and Win32 pulled out of there and tossed into Reunion, and then at the end of it,
Well,
we'll
I
all
mean,
meet up in Seattle and have beers and
yeah, I
talk
should.
about the good
Yeah,
times.
there's a C++ aspect to this. I never, and I'm never going to look at it. I couldn't care less about that. But I get if you're a like an actual Win32 developer, meaning you're using C++, and I God love you, but I guess there's a thing going on there too. I don't see any particular use case for that other than doing what I described earlier. You have some legacy app you already created. You're not going to make a new one, and you want to replace the UI with a modern UI. I guess that's what it's for. But I'm not going to look at that.
There you go. You got anything else for today, Paul?
I'm going to try to write. I have started this, and I'm going to try to write it up a little more cogently than I just said it. But my experience working on this, I spent a couple hours with Raphael remotely. We were both working on this, having the exact same experience. He eventually got a quote from a guy from Microsoft saying that the Project Reunion stuff does not work for existing WPF apps yet. That's something for preview 2 or 3 or whatever. So that's the big thing. The big thing for me today is just kind of following up on some of this stuff because, we saw what they were going to write about this, and that had one level of information. They gave I watched the WinUI session yesterday. There was some more information there, and then you have to actually use it, and you're like, okay. And then the picture kind of emerges. All right, here I can say this is what they're doing. So I'll try to make that make sense because I know I feel like I just said doesn't make any sense. Sorry, it's been a long 24 hours.
And there we go.